As a realtor in LA, I can tell you I have seen so many jacked up homes, from bad design, bad architecture, build quality, you name it. However, most of these flaws can oftentimes be overlooked. But there's one category that's almost always a deal killer: bad engineering. Engineering in a home is the application of science and design to make sure the structure is safe, stable, and functional. Poor engineering can result in devastating loss, physically and financially. And although this aspect is so important, it's often overlooked, even by realtors. And they say offense wins games, but defense wins championships. And the same is true when buying property. So when you're looking at that dream home, don't just be distracted by its good looks. You have to look where it really matters, at the structure itself. So today, I'm with Alpha Structural, the #1 structural repair firm in Southern California. And we're gonna go over the basics of home engineering and the biggest red flags to look out for when buying a home. This is the anatomy of a home with Maximus Properties and Alpha Structural. Let's get into it. Kyle, thanks for doing this.
Michael?
So we wanna understand the basic structural elements of a home. Basically what brings a home together and holds it together. So you tell me, where does it begin? I'm guessing with the soil, right?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, what every building starts with is the ground, the soil, right?
Yeah.
So you can see here, if you look in this trench here, this is a clay soil, very, very common in LA County,
Okay.
right? Clay is a bit of a pesky soil, but it's also probably the most prevalent soil type in LA County.
Okay,
right?
so typically when you're building a home, this is what you're gonna find.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially in the flats, any flat areas that are adjacent to foothills or slope areas, it's the runoff over millions of years, and that sediment just collects in these low areas, and that's how you basically get clay.
Okay, so real quick, before we even get into that, why does the soil that you're building on matter?
So when you have a typically constructed home, you're using what are called continuous foundations, right?
Okay.
It's basically a continuous concrete footing.
Okay.
A trench is excavated, rebar or steel is placed, and then concrete is poured, right? The footing or foundation always relies on the soil for what's called bearing support, right? So when you have what's called a continuous footing like this, right? Every foot of that trench is what the building is deriving its support from, right? So when you have soil issues where a foundation is built in soil that has either, what's called consolidation or compression or expansive soils where it undulates, it expands and contracts, right? Any movement of that soil, when you have this most common type of foundation, it follows where the soil goes, right? So if you have soil that compresses when it gets saturated, let's say, right, the foundation goes with it. When you have what's highly expansive clay, right, it'll swell in the winter, right, and the house will go up, and then you go into summer, we get a drought, it dries out and shrinks, the foundation goes down. So you'll see a manifestation of houses, even newer homes, where the foundation literally just goes up and down, up and down. So soil type and foundation design are very, very important, not only in new construction, but also addressing older homes too, because if the soil is poor, the foundation follows it.
Yeah.
And that's what it boils down to.
So then, let's say we're building a home from scratch. You find out, chances are you're building on clay soil. What's the process like there? How do you begin the home building process and I guess the engineering aspect of it?
So in LA County has code specifically for expansive soil.
Okay.
And it's in what's called the Type 5 sheet, which is the sort of pre-engineered or standard plan for foundations and framing. So LA County has done a great job in establishing what the basic standards for building a foundation and framing a single-story house or a two-story house, right? However, the minimum required depth in LA County for clay soil is 24 inches deep below the existing grade.
Okay.
Right?
That's for new construction.
That's new construction, and it applies to replacement too. So, for example, in this case, that's where we're at. We have at least 24 inches. I think we're actually a little bit deeper on this one, because that is where you get into a more consistently moist layer of clay, where it won't get wet and dry, wet and dry, right? So anybody knows that's done any sort of gardening, as soon as you start digging in the ground to pot a plant, the soil is moist, right? The more consistently moist clay is, the less it undulates or expands and contracts, right? So LA County requires minimum 24-inch depth into clay.
So then we've established this is the clay soil. We're going 24 inches deep to lay the footings, lay the foundation.
Yep.
The footings come next. You said it's a trench that is got rebar or steel placed into it, and then cement poured over that.
Correct.
Right?
Yep. A footing is all it is it's a cast in place concrete foundation that follows the load path of a building that's designed to support whatever loads the building are and the people in it.
Okay. And so then the floor system is built on that.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. So you build the foundation first. So in this case, you can see the rebar that's been installed, right? Now, up next, we're going to finish the forms and then pour or cast this foundation, right? So this is all going to be really nice concrete. Then, once that's done, like you said, the floor is then constructed on top of the foundation, right? It can either be top mounted, where it sits on top, or it can be connected to the side of it, right? But in any scenario, the floor system and the stud wall or perimeter framing, right, is always built generally on top of the foundation, right? So you have the soil, make sure the soil's okay, then you install the correctly designed foundation, then you frame on top of the foundation. And that's your floor framing, your stud wall framing, and of course your roof framing.
So then this is a raised foundation.
This is a raised foundation.
Talk to me about the different types of, or the common types of foundations you'll find in LA at least.
Absolutely. So it really just depends on location, right? So the two most common foundation types are raised foundation like this and a slab foundation, right? One, in this case, has a crawl space. So you can crawl underneath it, right? And access really any part of the crawl space or framing underneath, right? The slab foundation has no crawl space. It's just cast concrete over the soil, right? So those are your two main foundation types. Now
real quick, is a slab on grade poured out the same way or built with footings like this?
it has similar footings. However, there's no interior access, right? So for example, if you want to replace a slab on grade foundation, in this case, we're looking into the closet of our client's house right now, right? If you're doing a slab on grade foundation replacement, we're in that bedroom now replacing this foundation, because you have to cut through all the floors, because that if a slab foundation sinks, the whole thing sinks. You can't necessarily, lift it up without addressing that crack. We can lift slab foundations, but that crack is always going to stay in the bedroom, and most people don't want water coming up through a crack in the middle of their bedroom, or there's a big hump in the ground, right? So if the foundation has gotten so bad on a slab foundation where you have to replace it, it's very invasive and you have to go inside the building to do it. Right?
So are there benefits to a slab foundation?
Absolutely. Slab foundations, the one thing that really is sort of dangerous about slab foundations is plumbing underneath them. If you can keep the plumbing to the perimeter of the walls, slab foundation is the most ideal foundation to have. There's no crawl space. There's you don't have the susceptibility of pests, unknown water leaks. If you have all your water lines placed on the outside, right, and all your drain lines, if something leaks, you can immediately detect it. Whereas we've had clients that have had sewer leaks or water leaks under their house for 6 months, and it's a swimming pool under there. If possible, slab foundation is the preferred foundation.
Okay.
So those are the two foundation types, but in LA, we're obviously an old city.
Yeah.
So we have other types of foundations. We have brick foundations. We have river rock foundations. These are turn of the century, usually raised foundations, but they're made of a building material that really is not, certainly not to code, but it really has issues structurally, particularly when it comes to earthquakes.
Okay.
Very, very damage prone to to earthquakes. So that depends on the neighborhood, right? So for example, downtown LA and immediate surrounding areas around USC, mid-city, brick foundations. Brick
Really?
foundations everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, because that was the core of the city when it was founded.
Yeah.
And at that time, brick foundations are a turn of the century. They're a 19th century era foundation system, right? So that's just what they built with back then, right? The foothills, river rock foundations, everywhere. They were literally extracting the rocks out of the ground because a lot of those areas are watersheds that come out of the foothills.
Yeah.
So they prepare a pad to build a house. They'd start digging, and hey, what do you know? We got some real nice river rocks. And they literally would use the rocks that they pulled out of the ground to build the foundation. So beautiful homes, antiquated foundations.
And they're still there like that.
Yeah, we replace a lot of them. Those just either need to be bypassed or replaced. And the California Building Code defines those types of foundations as they call it a designated structural weakness, right? Because it says a known foundation or structural component that has major issues for seismic performance.
Oh.
And obviously we're in a seismically active area.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
So those are our main foundation types.
Okay. Cool. And so then next is the floor system.
That's right. Next is the floor system. So in this case, the floor system is behind the forms that we're setting, right? So the floor mounts to basically the side of this foundation.
Right.
Because
it's not sitting on top.
Correct. Yeah. So you have the floor joists, right? The floor system. And then this is called the mud sill. This is the first framing component that the wood framed home sits on. So that's the first component of framing that the house sits on top of the foundation, right? So you have foundation, mud sill, floor joists, either top mounted or side mounted. And then of course you have your wood frame wall here. This is your stud wall, right? These are your basic structural components that attach and integrate with a foundation system.
Okay. And then we get into the framing of the home.
Then,
right?
Yep, your stud framing either follows, if it's a single story house like this, it goes up to the ceiling joists and or the roof diaphragm. So that's where the framing stops. You could see these double top plates here. And then you have the framing that sits on top of this wall, which will be your ceiling joists, and then of course your roof framing. Those are your rafters. Your rafters will then orient upwards. In this case, this is a flat roof, so we have what's called a parapet wall, right? This is just a vertical wall. So you have different roofing configurations, but either you'll have a parapet wall with ceiling joists, or you'll have rafters with collar ties, and then eventually a ridge as your rafters ascend up to the peak there.
And so that's kind of the full system.
That's the full system. That's for a Type 5 home, a wood-framed home, that's the full structural system.
Okay.
You have foundation, sill plate, diaphragm, floor joists, wood-framed wall or stud wall, ceiling joists, roof.
So if you're looking at a home in LA, chances are you're looking at a raised foundation sitting on clay soil, a wood-framed house.
Yeah.
And a traditional roof.
That's right.
Okay. So then this is all great. Let's say either a homeowner or someone looking to buy a home. Why should they care about all this? What should they be looking at, when they're looking at their home? Can they even look at any of this?
Absolutely. We do about, I would say, 25 to 40 escrows a week where we consult for either buyers or sellers. But in any scenario, a buyer has to know what they're buying. It's like buying a car. If you buy a used car, you want the Carfax report. You want to know if there's an accident history. You want to know what the mechanical repair history is, right? It's the same thing with buying a home. You can get into scenarios where, you think everything's okay. Even a general inspector may tell you everything's okay, but it's not okay, right? That's why it's important to get, an expert to evaluate either foundation, plumbing, electrical, all the specialized trades, right? Those should be inspected because you want you want to know what you're buying.
Okay, and so, you said most homes have their issues as it relates to, foundation or the structural elements, right? At what point is it actually a problem?
It's a great question. So, like I said, every old home is going to have some degree of issues. And that doesn't mean it's a deal killer. That doesn't even necessarily mean there's something really bad, right? If you think about it, most of these houses have been here for 60, 70 years, right? Of course, they're going to have small deficiencies, right?
Yeah.
Usually when escrows get more contentious and they get more problematic and more difficult to really close is when you have really advanced geological issues, right? Landslides, severe settlement related issues, where maybe there's, an enormous amount of fill where they artificially created the whole neighborhood and really didn't compact the soil correctly. It's where you need very, very deep foundations, the pile foundations we discussed, where those get a little bit trickier because those are much more expensive to fix, right? Now, we get asked all the time from our real estate partners, is there such thing as a deal killer? Our sort of motto for over 30 years is we can fix anything. Anything can be fixed. It's just how much does it cost, right? We see the most horrific structural scenarios, real life safety issues. It's rare. It's rare, but if anybody sees most of them, it's us, right? So we have a way of conveying the severity of the issue, but it's really more just through a cost lens.
Yeah.
When we have a buyer ask us, well, is it a safety related issue? Well, no, of course it's not a safety related issue. Your house is 8 inches out of level. You're not going to like walking in those floors. You're not going to really enjoy seeing that slope. There are cracks that are going to show up. It's tolerable. You can manage. You can live in the house totally fine, but it's just a quality of life, and then of course an encumbrance on the property. So really the toughest ones to get through are major landslide issues that actually do impact the safety of the property. When you have, a 30-foot drop off and half your backyard is gone.
Yeah.
That's a little tough to get through when nobody even knew it was the case entering escrow.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not really like you said, if your floor is a little out of whack, it's not life or death. It's not. Is it setting up for a potentially massive loss with the property or damage that could occur? Like, let's say maybe heavy rains or the foundation just gets really wet over a long period of time. Is it okay to keep it like that?
Yeah, it is. You have to, the most important thing is you have to get it evaluated by a professional, because there is no one same condition or identical property, right? So for example, you could have a house that settles because it has a shallow foundation and some poor drainage, right? Okay, very tolerable issue. You could have an identical house that appears to settle, but it's really pervasive rot of the framing, and there's a legitimate potential failure issue or collapse issue with the framing because it's all just sponge framing that the termites have totally decimated. Two identical homes, two what appears to be identical issues, but two totally different structural problems, right? So getting it evaluated is the most important thing, because we tell clients all the time, especially in clay issues, yeah, it's clay, the drainage should be improved, or maybe you should put planters in this area. And they say, wow, the other 3 guys told me I shouldn't put planters. No, if you have a drought tolerant native plants and you do very, very limited controlled watering, you can actually keep the clay moist enough where it's not oversaturated, it's not damaging the foundation, and it maintains the stability of the clay so it isn't undulating. We give a lot of pointers like that. We won't even do work on it. And we have a lot of reviews because we're just very upfront and honest about what people can do practically with their houses, right? And then other scenarios, we'll go into a house and, there's a 3-inch wide crack and the foundation is literally, down 8 inches. It's like, well, okay, that we should probably fix.
Yeah.
So it just, every home always has something different. The first step is, You always know what you're buying. You always know what you're living in. And then you can plan for it. Most foundation issues you can always plan for.
Okay.
They're not emergency. You can do them in phases. Not the most cost effective to do that, but you can certainly plan for them. If somebody tells you it's an emergency, that should be an extraordinary circumstance and very, very rare.
Okay, so real quick, we
Yeah.
kind of went over a couple already, but let's just talk about some red flags.
Yeah.
So let's imagine we're buying this house.
Yep.
Okay, what are the biggest things you want to look out for?
Totally. So it's a great question. First and foremost, one of the issues with this property is the grading and drainage, right? This all slopes down from this garage here all the way to the house, right? And so what we're doing here is not only was the foundation totally destroyed from 100 years of water, what we call sheet flow, water running off of a wider area, right? But also the framing of the house was built below grade. So you had dirt piled up against the wood framing that sits on top of the foundation and water saturating it every year for 100 years. So in this scenario, it's drainage, grading, how is the foundation constructed and where is it constructed in relation to the finish outside grade. If you have wood framing built below grade, not only do you have pervasive rot and termite issues like we've encountered here, but you have mold and other health-related issues because you have trapped water creating a stagnant environment that just creates horrific conditions, right? So those are just two critical components: is how is the drainage and how is the foundation constructed? Is it a deep foundation? Is the consistency or the condition of the concrete good? Is it not good, right? That's where you start. You look at the inside of the house, you see what the floors tell you, you see what the walls, then you look at the outside, then you go underneath.
Okay. So you want to identify first, what's the drainage around the property like?
Yep.
Does it look like it's a negative slope into the property?
Yep.
And then kind of, is the floor uneven? Is this telling you anything that there's a problem with the foundation?
That's right. That's
and then
right.
you basically go from there.
You go from there, you identify if there are any gutters on the house, because of course we don't get too much water here in LA, but when we do, if you have a roof, usually the roof is anywhere from 25 to 50% of the property square footage in most lots.
Yeah.
And that all collects when it does rain, and it either dumps off on two sides if it's a pitched roof, or sometimes even one on a flat roof, because it goes to one scupper and downspout. So you can have a fire hose of water shooting out during rains on a house like this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's all tied. Downspouts and roof drainage is part and parcel with evaluating the drainage and the grading. It's not only how is it graded, how does the drainage look on the outside, but where's the roof drainage going to?
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Okay. What about efflorescence? In every house you get down into the raised foundation and you see along the concrete wall that little buildup.
Yep.
Is that a red flag?
No. So efflorescence is on every single foundation, including new foundations. Unless they've installed a waterproofing membrane on what's called the positive side of the foundation or the wall, the exterior side, you're going to get efflorescence, right? Any foundation that's built below grade, moisture will migrate through the concrete. Remember, concrete is porous. It's not waterproof, right? We see all the time, especially in the real estate world, where different contractors, professionals, so-called, really make efflorescence a big deal and are somewhat alarmist about it, right? The only time where efflorescence is problematic is when you have pervasive water intrusion into a foundation that results in severe degradation of the aggregate in the concrete, where it's just falling apart, right? That requires decades and decades of concentrated water flow to do that to a foundation. So in a nutshell, almost every foundation has efflorescence. We always make a note of it, and we make a note to educate people. We explain what it is. It's a white powdery mineral substance that basically manifests because water transfers from the positive face of the wall to the negative face of the wall. It goes through the porous concrete and it dries when it reaches the inside of the foundation and brings those minerals out of the concrete and turns into that flaky crystalline substance. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's very, very, very common. Like I said, just about every foundation has efflorescence.
Okay. So then would you say, let's say there's a lot of efflorescence, not destroying the concrete or anything, just a lot of efflorescence. Would you say typically that that's an indicator that there's nothing wrong with the foundation, but that's an indicator that there's a lot of moisture coming in, and it could be, because of a negative slope or lack of gutters or whatever the case may be?
We'll always look at that because it is an indicator, right? The problem is that if you have a planter or sprinklers next to your foundation, you're going to have efflorescence, right? So,
And that's not a problem.
No, it's not a problem. It is what it is.
Yeah.
It just happens, unless people spend money on waterproofing foundations, then they're going to have efflorescence, and it's certainly not a good, it's not a good use of funds to dig up your foundation just to waterproof it. We've seen contractors recommend that, and we don't agree with that because it's just the reality of what will happen to a foundation. It's a porous concrete element, and it's underground. It's going to get moisture, right?
Yeah.
We see tons of homes built in the 20s, 30s, 40s that have efflorescence, and the foundations are totally fine. If they've lasted that long with some efflorescence coming through it, it's not a major issue. Only when you have pervasive water intrusion that really starts to deteriorate the concrete itself does it become a problem.
Interesting. Okay. So then my last question, as far as red flags go, when you're buying a home, you get into escrow, you get what's called the natural hazard disclosure report. And in that report, it'll tell you if your property's in an expansive soil zone.
Yep.
When that happens, let's say you get that report and it says you are in an expansive soil zone. Is that a red flag?
Not necessarily. Some would argue this point, right? And what I'll say about it is that we have really, kind of four different scary zones, right? We have, earthquake-induced liquefaction zones. We have expansive soil zones. We have earthquake-induced landslide zones. And then we have fault lines, right? And fault line zones. So these are all pretty scary things when you think about it, right? But this is the way we as Angelenos live. We live in a very seismically active area, and there are certain innate hazards that come with living in this area. So, of course, would it be nice if we could enjoy this perfect weather and this amazing city that we live in without living in these sort of, hazards? Yes. But hey, nothing's too good to be true.
Yeah.
That would just be a fairy tale if we could get what we get here with no hazards. But, it is something to be conscious of. In certain scenarios, you would be more conscious of these things. So, for example, Alquius-Priolo fault lines. Those are active fault lines that are prone to ground rupturing, right? That's something to consider. If you are not one to really want to take any sort of gambles with earthquakes, well, maybe you don't buy a house in an Alquius-Priolo fault line zone, right? Earthquake-induced landslide zones. That can sound pretty scary. Most of the hillside areas are in earthquake-induced landslide zones. If you think about it, violent ground shaking occurs, landslides might happen, right? So it just, you can take proactive measures. The newer the house you buy in hillside areas, the lower the risk, because those foundations and retaining walls are built to the codes that they were designed for at that time. The newer the construction in hillside, the more advanced the foundation's going to be. So there are little tricks that you can use, but it's just the area we live in. You might be able to find a little carve out in certain areas to buy that's not one of these zones, but you're probably not going to like the area as much.
Yeah. Okay. So tough it out.
Or you design and for resilience, you upgrade the property, or you buy a property that's designed to the most current codes. There are certainly ways you can navigate it, but it's something that we have to deal with, and it's inescapable here. It's just where we live.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. I think that paints a full picture.
Good.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Let's do some rapid fire questions. Yeah.
Rapid fire questions.
What's one hidden problem almost every LA home has?
almost every LA, well, probably seismic. Most of them aren't retrofitted, you know. So the big one is going to come inevitably. How big, we don't know, but there are obviously Dr. Lucy Jones and most of the renowned seismologists have been warning us for decades now. I would say most homes do not have seismic upgrades.
Okay. What's the most dangerous thing in a home that buyers never notice?
Probably, I would say mold. Yeah, toxic mold particularly.
Okay.
Yeah. And they may not even know because it's under the house. Animals disturb it. The spores go through the wood floor system. These floors, especially older homes, are not airtight. And so I've had numerous clients that got mysteriously, severely ill, and they traced it to toxic mold.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Which fancy neighborhoods actually have the worst construction quality?
Ooh, this is a tough one. You know, it really depends. There's sort of a mix. I'd say most luxury neighborhoods share a pretty even mix of opportunist developers, right? And that's really where the construction quality is really hampered, is in that space. So there are areas, obviously Beverly Hills, certainly the Hollywood Hills. There's a lot of construction quality issues in the Hollywood Hills. Bird Streets area, there's a fair amount of sort of, you know, opportunistic developers that haven't really gotten it down yet in terms of building. You know, and a lot of people, you know, don't like to get permits, things like that. And then of course Los Feliz, you know, Los Feliz also has issues. So just kind of a stretch starting from Los Feliz, Hollywood Hills, and then, you know, getting into West Hollywood Hills. In terms of high-end neighborhoods, I would say those are probably the areas.
Do you know why? Or do you have a guess why?
Yeah, most people in hillside areas, I wouldn't say most people, but most people dread the permitting process in hillside areas. So when you have a contractor that's sort of a Mickey Mouse contractor, or you have a developer, they tend to egg on the client to not get permits, right? Because they don't want to wait for the job and they don't want to wait for the permitting process. So it sets up a real, you know, a really bad and unaccountable scenario for the client, where the client thinks that they're getting good advice, but they're really just getting sort of selfish advice from a contractor that wants to do a big job with no permits, which is a terrible idea. Yeah.
And you've seen this happen
all the time. I would say probably 35% of our work is ripping out construction defect issues from incompetent contractors.
Wow. Not even from older properties?
No.
Wow. What's the most expensive repair in a home?
Yeah, the most expensive structural repair I would say is going to be either deep pile foundations for hillside homes or oceanfront, or landslide repair. Those are the most expensive structural or soil related repairs that can be done on a property.
Okay, why is that?
Well, there's a lot of advanced engineering that takes place. It takes a long time to permit, enormous man hours, big equipment, big man hours to do those jobs.
Sure.
And then of course that's after you spend, you know, many months in permitting and engineering.
Yeah. Okay. This is one thing I forgot to ask you actually about retaining walls.
Yeah.
So if you have a retaining wall on your property, chances are it's leaning, or maybe it wasn't built correctly. Maybe it doesn't have the weeping holes properly built at the bottom. At what point do you look at a retaining wall and say, oh, this is something that needs to be taken care of?
Yeah, so it really just depends on the height of the wall, right? If you have a short retaining wall, you know, 2, 3, even 4 feet, and the conditions aren't very extreme, those are things, you know, if they're leaning a little bit, that really aren't that big of a deal. You know, you have to recommend, okay, eventually you're going to want to replace this, right? It's really where you have taller retaining walls, longer retaining walls in more extreme conditions with extreme distress that become a little bit more imperative. So we do a lot of the code enforcement repairs in LA where people construct illegal, you know, structures, they get caught, or, you know, maybe somebody constructed something illegal and then it failed and collapsed into a neighbor's yard. We do a huge volume of those projects every year. And that's where retaining walls get a little dicey, and you have to stress their importance, is that if they're in the proximity to threaten an adjacent property or your own, that's really where they become a big priority, and they can get pretty expensive.
Yeah.
You know, when a retaining wall has generally rotated 10% of its height, that's usually where we start to get concerned. So let's say you have a 6-foot wall, right?
Okay.
And it rotates, you know, however many inches, 6 inches, let's say, that's a problem. That's a major problem. That wall is considered failed at that point, right?
I see.
If it's 5%, right? Now it's, you know, it's distress. You could argue it maybe could be considered to be failing, but you know, you could have many years of life left in that wall,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. And where do you measure that 10% rule from?
At the top of the wall where the grade stops, right?
Okay.
So sometimes walls are, you'll have a retaining wall that's 6 feet tall, but then they build, you know, a 6-foot fence wall. We don't care about that. As engineers, we don't care about that. It's how tall is the retained side where the earth on the upper part of it stops, right? Then you just take either a plumb bob, that's the right piece of equipment to use. You take a plumb bob and it'll give you an exact measurement of how far out of plumb that retaining wall has leaned, right? Another little trick, this is a kind of a, you know, a Stone Age era trick, is you take a pebble or something weighted and you find the grade and you place it right there and you just let it free fall. Gravity will pull anything plumb, right? So you can drop a rock or, you know, a tangerine or anything weighted, right? And you place it just at the top of the wall and you just open your hands and you let it drop and you see where it lands and you can get a rough idea of
How far it is from the wall.
That's right.
I see.
Yeah. That's a
Good to
little
know.
old school trick if we don't have a plumb bob with us on hand.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a DIY project destroy a house?
Yeah, a couple times. You know, we've seen DIY projects. We've seen DIY projects with roof collapses where, you know, they tried to put in beams, or their contractor or handyman tried to put in beams and the roof collapsed. We've seen floor collapse issues where they tried to put in islands with no supplemental support for a very heavy island and the floor collapsed. There was a project that my father worked on. They ended up going with a different contractor. He didn't get permits. The entire house collapsed. That one was in the news. We've definitely encountered quite a few of those. Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah, it is pretty scary when that happens. Very rare, but you know, we see a lot of projects and we work on a lot of projects. So it's
If anyone's seeing it, it's you guys.
yeah.
Okay, what's the biggest scam in the home building world right now?
Biggest scam, there's so many, unfortunately. I would say the biggest scam are, you know, contractors that don't have the right licensing. So contractors that use, you know, unqualified tradespeople, that goes for the foundation and structural world, that goes for electrical and plumbing. You know, we always tell our clients, you know, there are core trades that you have to get a specialty licensed contractor, right? And you don't want to mess with it, right? Because we see so many scenarios. We do a lot of insurance claim work where we're doing damage assessment. Most of the fires that are started are from shoddy electrical, you know, and it's because they're hiring people that aren't qualified or specifically licensed as electricians, right? It's either a general contractor that self-performs and that has some guys that may kind of know electrical, or they just don't even hire anybody that has any license to do it, right? Same goes for the structural world. There are a lot of, you know, trades or foundation contractors that call themselves experts, right? But really don't have the licensing and credentials to back that up.
Yeah.
So it's a real pretty website. They say they're foundation specialists, but they really don't have the experience or the required licensing to back it up. Plumbers, the same thing. I can't even tell you how many plumbers are doing plumbing work, gas line work. Like this involves, you know, flammable and explosive work.
Yeah.
And they just don't have a license. And they're just not a licensed plumber.
Wow.
And anytime we have an opportunity to chime in with a client on that, we just say, no, you can't have an unlicensed electrician and an unlicensed plumber working on your gas lines together. Like, no.
The blind leading the blind.
It's just electrical, gas, those things don't go well together if they're not installed correctly.
Yeah.
That's when you see houses on the news that literally blow up, you know? So that's probably the biggest scam, is the unregulated Wild West here in LA of contractors that really aren't real contractors, and they aren't properly licensed contractors.
Okay. So how can you verify someone's licenses or check
So-
them, or even their tradespeople?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the most important thing you can do is this. Thankfully, the state of California has a very, very easy database to navigate. You just punch in their license number. You check how new is their license, and you check what kind of license it is. If somebody's saying we're foundation repair experts or concrete repair experts, and you look up their license and it's 3 years old and it's a general contractor's license, they don't have the leg to stand on to back that up.
Yeah.
They need a specialty license and ideally some more experience, right? So that's something to look out for, especially with foundation, structural, plumbing, and electrical too.
Okay. So how many specialty licenses are there? Do you know?
Oh, there are dozens and dozens of specialty
Oh, wow.
licenses. The entire list is found on the CSLB website, the Contractor State License Board. So we call it the Wild West.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like plumbers, electricians, structural, and it's
Doing
just
whatever they want.
just random guys doing whatever they want, you know. Oh yeah, that'll work, you know, and maybe it doesn't. Yeah, exactly. Sad to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the most shocking thing you've ever found at a project?
Well, I found dead bodies underneath buildings myself.
No way.
Yeah. I found, I did a piece with the LA Times, and I didn't go into the dead body part, but I did find an ancient skull that didn't look ancient, but it ended up being confirmed by the coroner as an ancient,
Sure.
yeah, Peruvian skull. No, when that was in a real estate transaction too. That was
Oh
a
my
tough deal
gosh.
to navigate. Yeah, that
Did it
was.
close?
I believe it did, but that was tough because, you know, we have to call the police.
Yeah.
And then the buyer's freaked out. There's a skull, and then the person involved is kind of a weirdo, and
Oh,
we were
man.
asking him about it, and his story didn't check out. And I'm just wondering, okay, is this a missing person from 20 years ago? But it turned out it actually was. You know, he had brought the skull in from a trip to Peru, which is really terrible that he did that. And it was an ancient skull. He stumbled upon, I think, ancient ruins and somehow got it through customs.
Wow.
But the story was legitimate, so at least it wasn't a
Yeah.
missing person. But yeah, I found, you know, unfortunately, I found bodies under buildings too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
was
Fresh.
that a, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
foul play.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Or
wow.
suicide. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What happens then? You obviously have to call the police.
You got to
and-
stay there. It ruins your whole day, you know. And obviously,
Sure.
you're pretty bummed out. You know,
Yeah.
it's a sad thing to see, and you know, yeah, you have to fill in lots of reports and lots of details, and you know, it's a pretty awful experience,
Yeah.
but it comes with the job.
Wow.
You know, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it happens.
It happens. Oh yeah, it happens.
Wow.
Yeah, most people.
That's unfortunate.
It is, yeah. I found the weirdest stuff. I found, you know, antique fishing poles. I found old like Nazi war medals and Nazi war memorabilia just like buried in the
Whoa.
dirt underneath houses. Yeah, I mean, just the craziest things you can imagine we found. You know, old opium bottles and, you know, just
Crazy stuff.
Yeah. Old Prohibition era distilleries underneath houses, whiskey
Wow.
casks, bottles. I
That's
mean,
cool.
Yeah, just everything. Old pornography from 100 years ago. I mean,
Wow.
the LA has a very, very interesting history.
It's the Wild West.
It's the Wild West, and vices lasted many a century. You know, so
That's funny.
yeah, it's so good and bad. We find
Yeah.
we find good and bad things under houses.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Okay. Which decade built the worst homes?
70s and 80s,
Without a doubt.
without a doubt.
Why?
It's just terrible framing quality, material quality was bad, construction oversight, building authority oversight, just terrible. Foundations
Wow.
were generally okay, but the framing, particularly the framing, is just awful. The framing and building envelope issues, like, you know, flashing, roofing, things like that. It's almost unfair. There was a very unfair trade-off that occurred over the decades where, houses built in the turn of the century, the 20s and the 30s had almost impeccable framing quality, right? The materials in which they were constructed, the tradesmen that were building them were just excellent quality, right? But the foundations were not. The foundation design was still a rapidly evolving thing, transitioning from brick and river rock foundations to concrete and very shallow concrete foundations. So that then, as we evolved through, I would say probably the most consistent era of construction was mid-century, right? That was where we had probably, I wouldn't say superior construction, but just well-rounded framing and foundation. So the quality was consistent in the mid-century era. Then we traded off in the 70s and 80s where the foundation design really improved, right? And you had much more robust foundations, but the framing and construction quality above the foundations was just terrible.
Why?
Terrible. It's just, again, the 80s, those were wild times, wild people. Doing wild things, and certainly in construction, those guys were doing wild things, right? Probably on the job too. The products really, that was really a big, boom of building products where building styles changed and transitioned into more sort of modern, that more modern 80s contemporary era. And it's just the quality just was really cheap, and they tried to do things with buildings that they really couldn't figure out, and they leaked. The construction material wasn't as good, and it just fell apart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, kind of off topic, what are the limitations with some mid-century homes?
So really, the biggest thing with mid-century homes is seismic. It's like particularly mid-century modern.
Yeah.
We're the only stilt specialist in town. We work on all the stilt homes here, whether they're Gessner boat houses or you're just your regular elevated stilt home. And that's really the biggest thing about mid-century moderns is that a lot of them are post and beam design. They're very open, they're gorgeous, but they really don't have any lateral resistant elements in them. So they're really prone to movement in heavy ground motion.
What about Spanish homes? What's the biggest red flag or downside to Spanish homes?
Spanish homes, in my experience, and I've inspected thousands of buildings, they're usually, the foundations are very shallow and they're tight crawl spaces. That's
What's the small Europeans they were preparing for?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's like they didn't know what kind of big burly fat guys were going to be crawling under them in America here. That I would say that's probably the most common issue with Spanish styles are very tight crawl spaces. So you get like pests and mold and moisture can get trapped underneath it.
Sure.
And then the foundations are very shallow, so they get beat up a little bit more than other buildings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was amazing. Wealth
Michael,
of knowledge,
good.
super valuable.
Good.
Awesome. I think we killed it.
I think we did too, man.
Oh yeah.
Okay, on to the next one. Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.